Welcome to Anxiety Talks, a podcast where we dive deep into understanding anxiety and how we can manage it. Before we start, my name is Lynn Bughanem and I am a student. I'm a student counselor at Bangor University. So I'm currently learning and sharing my knowledge with you. But if you're struggling with anxiety, please do consult a professional for personalized advice as needed. In this episode, we'll cover a range of topics to help you better understand anxiety. We'll discuss why anxiety exists, what it actually is, the difference between everyday anxieties and anxiety disorders, and finally, some effective coping mechanisms. Finally, I'll also be adding some helpful resources for further support as needed. So, the big question is, why does anxiety even exist? Anxiety is not just something that causes discomfort, it has an important evolutionary function. According to Bates and Brillet and Nettle in their publication, Anxiety: An Evolutionary Approach, anxiety is an adaptive response that has evolved to help humans detect and respond to potential threats in their environment. Think about it. In our ancient past, a heightened sense of anxiety meant that we were more likely to detect danger, whether from predators or environmental threats, and this led to more likely to survive. Anxiety serves as an early warning system. It keeps us alert and ready to take action when a potential threat arises. People with a lower threshold for anxiety, meaning those who respond quickly to perceived dangers, may have had an evolutionary advantage in unpredictable environments. So even if it doesn't actually feel like it, in some cases, being more prone to anxiety can help us in unpredictable environments. This is explained through signal detection theory, where our brains are constantly assessing whether we should respond to something as a threat. It's better to have an unnecessary anxiety response, a false alarm, than to miss an actual threat. That is the mechanism that our brain follows. So if you've ever wondered why some people seem overly anxious, it might be that their brains are tuned to prioritize survival over comfort. Interestingly, your personal life history and environment can shape how anxious you are. People who grew up in high-threat environments, like unstable or dangerous childhoods, may have a lower threshold for anxiety. In contrast, those who were raised in more stable environments might have a more balanced anxiety response. In other cases, in other scenarios other than the evolutionary response, there are also different theories to how anxiety is developed. So according to Steimer of 2002, there's an emphasis of the gene-environment interaction, how our genes are interacting with the environment during development, so during the prenatal period of as we're forming in the womb. And it shapes the vulnerability that some people might have to anxiety disorders. So why does anxiety persist today if we're not facing the same threats? So if we're looking at the threats that we face today, not even threats, maybe just situations that we find ourselves in, which are social rejection, job insecurity, financial stress, and in some more extreme situations, the global crisis of the COVID pandemic. While these are not life-threatening in the same way as a predator attack, our brains still respond to them as they are. And this mismatch is one of the reasons anxiety disorders can be more prevalent today. In modern society, the evolutionary mechanism that helped us survive has now become quite maladaptive because it's triggering an anxiety response at a much heightened level than we actually need to respond in our day-to-day lives. So, what is anxiety? In simple terms, anxiety is the natural response to stress or perceived threat. It can manifest as feelings of unease, worry, or fear. It's the body's fight or flight response that kicks in, preparing us for a challenge. But when anxiety becomes excessive or chronic, it can interfere with our daily lives and well-being. So before we look into a bit of the feelings that you might be having when you're facing anxiety, there's a good example here of our body's way of keeping us safe. So if you're walking down the street and you look down and you see a snake, the fight or flight response that we discussed is going to be triggered, and you're going to respond as if you saw a threat. But if you look again and you see that that snake is actually just a stick on the floor, your body has already responded to it as a snake because we are prone to keep ourselves safe, and that is prioritized over our comfort. So some of the common feelings that might indicate that you're experiencing anxiety on a daily basis are feelings of overwhelm or on edge, restlessness or an inability to relax, irritability or frustration, a sense of dread or impending doom, and excessive worry or self-doubt. And these can also show up as physically, so you can feel them as racing thoughts, difficulty concentration, or even trouble sleeping. But these are different than anxiety disorders. So if we're going to look at the difference between everyday anxiety that on some level most people or even all people feel, and these can be mild, short-term, or situational, and it goes away after the situation is resolved. If you have a presentation or a job interview, you might be feeling a certain level of anxiety, but after you've overcome that successfully, you no longer have the same level of anxiety. And these can be managed with strategies such as deep breathing and other strategies that we'll be discussing today. And it doesn't interfere significantly with your daily life. Whereas anxiety disorders can be excessive, persistent, and overwhelming. They're disproportionate to the actual threat. So the level of anxiety that you're feeling to something that you're perceiving as a threat is mismatched. And it can last for months or even more. And without a clear stressor, you don't have a certain exam that's coming up that's making you stressed. It's that there's that stress that's always existent without that perception of the threat. And it can interfere with your daily life, work, or relationships. These can have more extreme physical symptoms like rapid heartbeat, shortness of breath, dizziness, or muscle tension. They can also evolve into panic attacks or anxiety attacks. And we'll look into how the grounding techniques can also help with these. So there's a few common anxiety disorders. These, just to name a few, these are not what we're focusing on today. So there's generalized anxiety disorder, which is like a chronic worry about public aspects of life. A common disorder that's well known is PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. This is the anxiety that follows having experienced a trauma. And there's quite a few more. And it's important to know that these can escalate more into anxiety attacks and, as I've mentioned, these feelings of overwhelm and intense. And we'll also look into how talking therapies such as CBT can actually, in some cases, be beneficial. So first, to talk about breathing techniques or different grounding techniques that can help. So these are coping mechanisms. So if you're struggling with anxiety, these techniques can help you calm your nervous system. So a deep breathing, the diaphragmatic breathing, is when you inhale for 4 seconds, you hold that breath for 4 seconds, and then you exhale and you repeat that a few times just to regulate yourself and your breathing. Another form of grounding is the 5-4-3-2-1 grounding technique, which basically looks at 5 things that you can identify to see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can feel, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. So this will bring you back into your body. It will bring you back to the reality that you're actually living, and it might help and it has shown to help in lowering that anxiety in the given moment. So if we're talking a little bit more about a safety plan in dealing with anxiety, it's important to have a safety plan just as a personal guide in coping with when your anxiety escalates. And it might involve a few things such as recognizing early signs of anxiety. So this can be very subjective and people have different triggers. So when you identify these triggers, these can help you. There can be immediate coping strategies, support networks, so a network of friends that you know that you can rely on when these things happen. And for the short term, it can also be good to distract yourself while using a favorite show or a different hobby to remove yourself from that environment of anxiety. There are also resources and helplines. So if you need help or support, you are not alone. And there are many resources that are available. To name a few, there's the Samaritans, that are open 24/7, and you can call them at 1116123. There is Mind and Anxiety UK. And finally, there's the NHS 111. When you press option 2, it can take you directly to someone to speak to help you deal with your mental health if you're suffering with any mental health discomfort. So to wrap up quickly today's episode, if you're struggling with anxiety, please know that you're not alone. It's a natural response to stress, but when it becomes excessive, it can interfere with your life. The good news is there's plenty of strategies and support networks available to help you manage it. So the anxiety might feel overwhelming at times, but with the right tools and support, you can take back control. Furthermore, you can also see your anxiety after controlled as a good thing. Like, you can see how your anxiety helps you plan for the future. So if it's not causing a huge mismatch, if it's not causing a huge amount of discomfort, it can also be very beneficial. I'd like to thank you for joining me for the first episode of Anxiety Talks. Don't forget to tune in next time for some more insight. As always, we'll be talking about anxiety, and it's important to remember that your anxiety does not define you.